The Battle of Svolder was a naval battle fought in September 999 or 1000 in the western Baltic Sea between King Olaf Tryggvason of Norway and an alliance of his enemies. The backdrop of the battle was the unification of Norway into a single state, long-standing Danish efforts to gain control of the country, and the spread of Christianity in Scandinavia. King Olaf was sailing home after an expedition to Wendland when he was ambushed by an alliance of Sven Forkbeard, King of Denmark, Olaf Skotkonung, King of Sweden, and Erik Hakonasson, Jarl of Lade. Olaf had only 11 warships in the battle against a fleet of at least 70. His ships were captured one by one, last of all the Ormenlongi, which Jarl Erik captured as Olaf threw himself into the sea. After the battle, Norway was ruled by the Jarls of Lade as a fief of Denmark and Sweden. The exact location of the battle is disputed, and depends on which group of sources is preferred. It is only Icelandic sources that place it near a place called Svolder, while Adam of Bremen places it in Öresund. The most detailed sources on the battle, the King's Sagas, were written approximately 2 centuries after it took place. Historically unreliable, they offer an extended literary account describing the battle and the events leading up to it in vivid detail. The sagas ascribe the causes of the battle to Olaf Tryggvason's ill-fated marriage proposal to Sigrid the Haughty and his problematic marriage to Thyri, sister of Sven Forkbeard. As the battle starts, Olaf is shown dismissing the Danish and Swedish fleets with ethnic insults and bravado while admitting that Erik Hakonasson, his men are dangerous because they are Norwegians like us. The best-known episode in the battle is the breaking of Einar Thambarskelfir's bow, which heralds Olaf's defeat. In later centuries, the saga descriptions of the battle, especially that in Snorre Sturluson's Heimskringla, have inspired a number of ballads and other works of literature. Context: in earliest recorded history, Norway was divided into a number of small and sometimes warring petty kingdoms with weak central authority. In traditional historiography, the rise of Harald Fairhair in the 9th century started the process of unification of the country and the consolidation of royal power. Harald's descendants, and other claimants to the throne, had to contend with strong regional leaders such as the Jarls of Lade in the north and the rulers of Ingolmark in the east, while the kings of Denmark claimed regions in the south and were eager to acquire Norwegian vassals to increase their influence. The spread of Christianity also became an increasingly important political issue in the late 10th century. In the 970s, Håkon Sigurdsson, Jarl of Lade, became the most powerful man in Norway, at first supported by Harald Bluetooth of Denmark and paying tribute to him, though the two later fell out over religious matters. Harald had converted to Christianity and was eager to Christianize Norway, while Håkon remained a staunch pagan. In 995 Håkon was deposed and the young Christian leader Olaf Tryggvason came to the throne. While rejecting Danish authority, Olaf made it his mission to convert Norway and the Norse colonies in the west as quickly and as completely as possible. Proceeding with threats, torture and executions, Olaf broke down pagan resistance, and within a few years Norway was, at least nominally, a Christian country. But King Olaf had acquired several enemies during his meteoric rise to power. The most prominent were Erik Jarl, son of Håkon Jarl, and Sven Forkbeard, King of Denmark, both of whom felt that Olaf had deprived them of their share of Norway. The same interests which clashed in the Battle of Svolder were to divide Norway for decades to come, leading to further major engagements, including the Battle of Najar and the Battle of Stiklestad. The resolution came in 1035 with the accession of the Norwegian Magnus the Good to the throne of an independent and Christian Norway. Events leading up to the battle. Nothing can be gleaned from the contemporary skaldic poems on the causes of the battle. Adam of Bremen states that Olaf Tryggvason's Danish wife Thyri egged him on to make war against Denmark. When Olaf heard that Sven Forkbeard and Olaf the Swede had formed an alliance, he was angered and decided the time had come for an attack. Agra and historian Norwegi have a similar account. Thyri was the sister of Sven Forkbeard, and when Olaf Tryggvason married her, Sven refused to pay her promised dowry. Angered, Olaf launched an expedition to attack Denmark, but he was too impatient to wait for a fleet to assemble from all of Norway, and he set sail for the south with only 11 ships, expecting the rest to follow. When that hope was not realized, he set out for Wendland to seek allies and on the way was ambushed by Sven and his allies. These accounts are contradicted by a contemporary verse of Halldor the Unchristian which states that Olaf Tryggvason was travelling from the south when he came to the battle. Oddr Snorrason has an elaborate account of the problems arising from Thyri's marriages. He tells us that she was betrothed and married to the Wendish king Bur-Eiliv. She then arranged to have herself married to Olaf Tryggvason, to the displeasure of her brother Sven. Sven's queen, Sigrid the Haughty, a staunch opponent of Olaf, egged Sven to make war on him. Sven then conspired with Jarl Sigvaldi and King Olaf of Sweden to lure Olaf Tryggvason into a trap. Olaf Tryggvason travelled to Wendland to collect Thyri's dowry from King Bur-Eiliv, and while there heard rumours of a planned ambush, but Sigvaldi arrived to tell him these rumours were false. Believing Sigvaldi, Olaf sent most of his fleet home, as his men were impatient. He therefore had only a small fleet left when he was ambushed near Svolder. Fageskinner and Heimskringla largely follow Odd's account, but simplify it and diverge from it in some respects. According to Heimskringla, Sigvaldi sailed from Wendland with Olaf and a fleet of Wendish ships and led him into the ambush. Whether the above details are accurate or not, it is clear that Sven, Olaf the Swede and Erik had ample reason to oppose Olaf Tryggvason. Olaf had taken control of Viken in South Norway, an area long under Danish overlordship. Olaf and Sven had been in England together, but Olaf had made peace while Sven kept campaigning. Sven was on friendly terms with Olaf the Swede and connected to him by marriage, so the two were natural allies. From the conflicting accounts of the sources, historians have tried to reconstruct the most likely sequence of events leading up to the battle. It is probable that Olaf Tryggvason was indeed sailing from Wendland to Norway when he was ambushed, though the king's sagas probably play up the importance of Thyri and her marriages. While it is possible that Olaf was collecting dowry, it seems more probable that he was expecting war and seeking allies in Wendland, but met with little success. The character of Sigvaldi remains enigmatic, though there is evidence from skaldic poetry that he did indeed betray Olaf. Time and location. All sources which date the battle agree that it took place in 1000. The oldest source to date it is the meticulous Islendingabok, written around 1128, which specifies that it took place in the summer. Oddr Snorrason says further that the battle is memorialized for the fallen men on the 3rd or 4th Ides of September. Mester states that the battle occurred on the 9th of September, and other sources agree with either date. Since some medieval writers reckon the end of the year in September, it is possible that the year referred to is in fact the one we know as 999. The location of the battle cannot be identified with any certainty. According to Adam of Bremen, it took place in Oresund. Agra and historian Norwegi also place it off Zealand. Theodoricus says it took place beside the island which is called Svoldr, and it lies near Slavia. Fageskinner speaks of an island off the coast of Vinland. His island is called Svold. Oddr Snorrason and Heimskringla agree on the island's name but do not specify its location. A stanza by Skully Thorsteinsson speaks of the mouth of Svolder, suggesting that Svolder was originally the name of a river which Norse unfamiliarity with Wendish geography turned into an island. The Danish Analyrances are unique in placing the battle in the Schlei. Modern historians are divided, some locating the confrontation near the German island of Rügen while others prefer Oresund. Composition of the fleets. The Norse sources agree that Olaf Tryggvason fought against overwhelming odds in the battle. Fake Skinner, for example, says that he had only a small force, and that the sea around him was carpeted with warships. The sources which specify the number of warships all agree that Olaf Tryggvason had 11 vessels, but they give various numbers for the Allied fleets, though the sagas agree that Olaf Tryggvason had only 11 ships in the battle. Some of them quote a verse by Halldor the Unchristian saying that Olaf had 71 ships when he sailed from the south. The sagas explain the discrepancy by saying that some of the 71 ships belonged to Jarl Sigvaldi, who deserted Olaf, and that others sailed past the trap at Svolder before it was sprung. The sagas describe 3 of the ships in Olaf Tryggvason's fleet. According to Heimskringla, the Crane was a large swift-sailing warship with 30 rowers' benches, high in stem and stern. It was commissioned by King Olaf and used as his flagship for some time. Olaf confiscated the second of his great ships from a pagan he had tortured to death for refusing to convert to Christianity. King Olaf steered it himself, because it was a much larger and finer ship than the Crane. Its stem had a dragon's head on it, and on its stern, a crook shaped like a tail, and both sides of the neck and all the stern were gilded. That ship the king called the Serpent, because when the sail was hoisted it was to look like the wing of a dragon. It was constructed as a dragon ship, on the model of the Serpent which the king had taken along from Halagerland, only it was much larger and more carefully wrought in all respects. He called it the Long Serpent and the other one, the Short Serpent. The Long Serpent had 34 compartments. The head and the tail were all gilt, and the gunwales were as high as those on a seagoing ship. This was the best ship ever built in Norway, and the most costly. The only Allied ship described is Jarl Erik's Iron Ram. According to Fake Skinner, it was the biggest of all ships. Heimskringla gives more detail. Earl Erik owned a mighty big ship which he was accustomed to take on his Viking expeditions. It had a beak, or ram, on the upper part of the prow, fore and aft, and below that heavy iron plates as broad as the beak itself, which went down to the waterline. The leaders assessed their opponents. It is unlikely that the saga writers had accurate information on details of the battle beyond the sparse accounts in the surviving poems. Nevertheless, starting with Oddr Snorrason, they present an elaborate literary account, depicting the main participants through their words and deeds. Olaf Tryggvason's ships passed the anchorage of his allied enemies in a long column without order, as no attack is expected. Conveniently placed to observe the fleet, Jarl Erik and the two kings remark upon the passing vessels. Sven and Olaf are eager to join battle, but Erik is portrayed as more cautious and familiar with the Norwegian forces. As progressively larger vessels appear, the Danes and Swedes think each one is the Long Serpent and want to attack straight away. But Erik holds them off with informed comments. It is not King Olaf on this ship. I know this ship because I have seen it often. It is owned by Erling Skjalgsson from Jadar, and it is better to attack this ship from the stern. It is manned with such fellows that, should we encounter King Olaf Tryggvason, we will quickly learn that it would be better for us to find a gap in his fleet than to do battle with this long ship. As Erik finally consents to attack, King Sven boasts that he will command the Long Serpent before the sun sets. Erik makes a remark, so that few men heard him, saying that, with only the Danish army at his disposal, King Sven would never command this ship. As the Allies set out to attack Olaf Tryggvason, the point of view shifts to the Norwegian fleet. After spotting the enemy, Olaf might have used sail and oar to outrun the ambush and escape, but he refuses to flee and turns to give battle with the 11 ships immediately about him. Seeing the Danish fleet arrayed against him, he comments, "The forest goats will not overcome us, for the Danes have the courage of goats. We will not fear that force because the Danes have never carried off the victory if they fought on ships." Similarly, Olaf writes off the Swedes with a reference to their pagan customs. The Swedes will have an easier and more pleasant time licking out their sacrificial bowls than boarding the Long Serpent in the face of our weapons, and succeeding in clearing our ships. I expect that we will not need to fear the horse-eaters. It is only when Olaf Tryggvason sights Erik Hakonsson's contingent that he realizes he is in for a hard battle, because they are Norwegians like us. The saga's emphasis of Erik's contribution stands in marked contrast to the Danish accounts of Adam of Bremen and Saxo Grammaticus, who portray the battle as a Danish victory over Norwegians, with no mention of Jarl Erik or his men. The battle is joined. The disposition adopted in the battle was one which recurs in many sea fights of the Middle Ages where a fleet had to fight on the defensive. Olaf lashed his ships side to side, with his own, the Long Serpent, in the middle of the line, where her bows projected beyond the others. The advantages of this arrangement were that it left all hands free to fight, that a barrier could be formed with the oars and yards, and that it limited the enemy's ability to make its superior numbers count. The Long Serpent was the longest ship and so also the tallest, another advantage to the defenders, who could rain down arrows, javelins and other missiles while the enemy would have to shoot upwards. Olaf, in effect, turned his 11 ships into a floating fort. The sagas give all the credit to the Norwegians, praising Erik Hakonssson for any intelligence and for most of the valor shown by Olaf Tryggvason's opponents. The Danes and Swedes rush at the front of Olaf's line and are repulsed, suffering heavy casualties and loss of ships. Jarl Erik attacks the flank and forces his vessel, the Iron Ram, up against the last ship of Olaf's line, which he clears with a fierce attack and then proceeds on to the next ship. In this way, Olaf's ships were cleared, one by one, till the Long Serpent alone was left. Einar Thambarskelfir. One of the best-known episodes from the battle involves Einar Thambarskelfir, an archer in King Olaf's fleet who later became a cunning politician. Heimskringla describes his attempt at killing Jarl Erik and saving the day for Olaf. Einar shot an arrow at Earl Erik, which hit the tiller end just above the Earl's head so hard that it entered the wood up to the arrow shaft. The Earl looked that way, and asked if they knew who had shot, and at the same moment another arrow flew between his hand and his side, and into the stuffing of the chief's stool, so that the barb stood far out on the other side. Then said the Earl to a man called Finn, but some say he was of Finn race, and was a superior archer. Shoot that tall man by the mast. Finn shot, and the arrow hit the middle of Einar's bow just at the moment that Einar was drawing it, and the bow was split in 2 parts. "What is that?" cried King Olaf, "that broke with such a noise?" "Norway, king, from thy hands," cried Einar. "No, not quite so much as that," says the king. "Take my bow, and shoot," flinging the bow to him. Einar took the bow, and drew it over the head of the arrow. Too weak, said he, for the bow of a mighty king, and, throwing the bow aside, he took sword and shield, and fought valiantly. The same story is found in Gesta Danorum, though there Einar is aiming at Sven, rather than Erik. King Olaf's death. At last the Long Serpent is overpowered and Olaf Tryggvason defeated. The Danish sources report that when all was lost he committed suicide by throwing himself into the sea, the end befitting his life. According to Adam of Bremen, Saxo Grammaticus says that Olaf preferred suicide to death at the hands of the enemy and jumped overboard in full armor rather than see his foes victorious. The Norwegian and Icelandic accounts are more complex and more favorable to Olaf. Halfred's memorial poem for his lord had already alluded to rumors that Olaf escaped death at Svolder. The sagas offer a variety of possibilities. Agra reports, but of the fall of King Olaf nothing was known. It was seen that as the fighting lessened he stood, still alive, on the high deck astern on the Long Serpent, which had 32 rowing places. But when Erik went to the stern of the ship in search of the king, a light flashed before him as though it were lightning, and when the light disappeared, the king himself was gone. Other sagas suggest that one way or another Olaf made his way to the shore, perhaps by swimming, perhaps with the help of angels, most likely rescued by one of the Wendish ships present. After his escape, Olaf supposedly sought salvation for his soul abroad, perhaps joining a monastery. Mester describes a series of sightings of him in the Holy Land, the last in the 1040s. King Olaf, like Charlemagne, Frederick Barbarossa and Sebastian of Portugal, is one of those legendary heroic figures whose return was looked for by the people, the deaths never completely accepted. Aftermath. After the Battle of Svolder, the victorious leaders split Norway into areas of control. Heimskringla gives the most detailed account of the division, describing it as threefold. Olaf the Swede received 4 districts in Trondheim as well as Møre, Romsdal and Ranrike. He gave these to Jarl Sven Håkonesson, his son-in-law, to hold as a vassal. Sven Falkbeard gained possession of the Viken district, where Danish influence had long been strong. The rest of Norway was ruled by Erik Håkonesson, Sven's vassal. Fag Skinner, in contrast, says that the Swedish part consisted of Oppland and a part of Trondheim. Other sources are less specific. The Jarls Erik and Sven proved strong, competent rulers, and their reign was prosperous. Most sources say that they adopted Christianity but allowed the people religious freedom, leading to a backlash against Christianity which undid much of Olaf Tryggvason's missionary work.